The crystal chandeliers of the Beverly Hills Hotel ballroom cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as Reba McEntire stood in the ladies' restroom, staring at her reflection in the ornate gold-framed mirror. The October evening of 2008 had started with such promise, but now, barely 2 hours into the Music Industry Foundation's annual gala, she felt like she was drowning in a sea of designer gowns and artificial smiles. The red-headed country music icon who had conquered Nashville was finding herself completely out of place in the glittering world of Los Angeles entertainment elite. The invitation to perform at the prestigious charity gala had arrived 3 months earlier, delivered by courier to her Nashville home on heavy cream-colored cardstock that spoke of old money and established power. The envelope itself was a work of art, with hand-calligraphed addressing and a wax seal bearing the foundation's coat of arms. Inside, the invitation was printed on paper so thick and luxurious that it felt more like fabric than stationery, with gold embossing that caught the light when tilted at different angles. The Music Industry Foundation's annual fundraiser was one of the most exclusive events in the entertainment calendar, typically featuring pop superstars, rock legends, and the kind of artists who dominated the Billboard Hot 100. The event had been held annually for 35 years, raising millions of dollars for music education programs while serving as the entertainment industry's most prestigious gathering. Past performers had included legends like Paul McCartney, Stevie Wonder, and Madonna, creating a legacy that intimidated even the most successful artists. Country music performers were rarely invited to the gala, and when they were, it was usually the crossover artists who had successfully bridged the gap between Nashville and mainstream America. Artists like Shania Twain and Faith Hill had performed at previous galas, but always as representatives of country music's ability to adapt to broader commercial sensibilities, rather than as pure expressions of the genre's unique artistic traditions. Reba had been surprised by the invitation, but also deeply intrigued. At 53 years old, she had achieved everything there was to achieve in country music. 24 number-one singles, multiple Grammy Awards, dozens of gold and platinum albums, sold-out stadium tours that had taken her to every corner of North America, and a successful acting career that had taken her from the Grand Ole Opry stage to Broadway theaters and television soundstages. She was a member of the Country Music Hall of Fame, a recipient of the Kennedy Center Honors, and widely regarded as one of the greatest female vocalists in any genre. Yet despite all these accomplishments, Reba had always felt like country music existed in its own universe, separate from the broader entertainment industry that centered itself in Los Angeles and New York. The genre had its own award shows, its own media outlets, its own social hierarchies, and its own cultural assumptions that rarely intersected with the mainstream entertainment establishment. This invitation represented an opportunity to bridge that divide, to bring country music's unique perspectives and artistic traditions to an audience that had rarely been exposed to their full richness and complexity. The gala was being held to raise funds for music education programs in underserved communities across the United States, a cause that resonated deeply with Reba's own experiences growing up in rural Oklahoma. She had been born in McAllister, a small town where opportunities for artistic education were limited and often dependent on the dedication of individual teachers who went far beyond their job descriptions to nurture young talent. She had learned to sing in church choirs and school programs, receiving the kind of musical education that was increasingly rare in communities where arts programs were the first to be cut when budgets tightened. Her childhood home had been filled with music, with her mother Alice serving as both inspiration and instructor. Alice McEntire had been a school teacher with dreams of her own musical career, dreams that had been set aside to raise 4 children but never completely abandoned. She had passed on her love of music to all her children, but Reba had shown the most natural talent and the strongest drive to pursue it professionally. The family's modest income had meant that private music lessons were a luxury they could rarely afford, making the public school music programs and church choir experiences even more crucial to Reba's development as an artist. The opportunity to support similar programs for a new generation of young musicians felt like a way to give back to the community that had nurtured her own talents, while also demonstrating country music's commitment to education and artistic development. The Foundation's mission statement spoke of providing instruments, instruction, and inspiration to children who might otherwise never have the chance to discover their own musical abilities, a goal that aligned perfectly with Reba's own values and experiences. Preparing for the evening had been an exercise in cultural navigation that required careful consideration of every detail, from wardrobe choices to repertoire selection. Reba's usual performance attire consisted of rhinestone-studded dresses, cowboy boots, and the kind of glamorous but approachable styling that worked perfectly in country music venues but might seem out of place in the rarefied atmosphere of a Beverly Hills charity gala. The fashion expectations for such events were complex and unforgiving, with every choice subject to scrutiny from entertainment reporters and industry observers who could make or break reputations with a single photograph or critical comment. After extensive consultations with her stylist, manager, and publicist, she had chosen an elegant black evening gown that was sophisticated without being flashy, paired with understated jewelry that spoke to good taste rather than Nashville flash. The dress was custom designed by a New York couturier who specialized in creating formal wear for high-profile events, with a silhouette that was both contemporary and timeless. The jewelry consisted of simple diamond earrings and a delicate necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, pieces that carried personal meaning while meeting the stylistic requirements of the occasion. Her hair and makeup team had worked for hours to create a look that would translate well under the ballroom's dramatic lighting, while maintaining the natural beauty that had always been part of her appeal. The styling was more subtle than her usual stage appearance, designed to project sophistication and elegance rather than the bold, attention-grabbing presence that worked well in concert venues. Every detail had been carefully considered, from the shade of her lipstick to the way her hair was styled to complement the neckline of her dress. The guest list for the evening read like a comprehensive directory of the entertainment industry's most powerful and influential figures. A-list movie stars who commanded $20 million salaries mingled with Grammy-winning pop artists whose albums sold in the tens of millions. Legendary rock musicians whose careers spanned decades shared tables with young performers who had recently achieved breakthrough success. Music industry executives who controlled the flow of hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue moved through the crowd, their presence indicating the commercial importance of the relationships being maintained and developed throughout the evening. The ticket price for the gala was $5,000 per person, with VIP tables going for $50,000 and premium sponsorship packages reaching into six figures. These prices put the event far beyond the reach of ordinary music fans, and solidly in the territory of industry insiders, wealthy philanthropists, and corporate executives who viewed the evening as both a charitable contribution and a networking opportunity. The exclusivity was part of the appeal, creating an environment where the most powerful people in entertainment could interact without the usual pressures of public scrutiny. The Beverly Hills Hotel itself was an icon of old Hollywood glamour, its pink facade and tropical gardens having provided the backdrop for countless celebrity gatherings since its opening in 1912. The Polo Lounge had been the site of legendary deal-making sessions, while the Crystal Ballroom had hosted some of the most important events in entertainment history. The hotel's guest registry read like a comprehensive history of American celebrity culture, with everyone from Howard Hughes to Elizabeth Taylor having called it home during significant periods of their lives. Reba had arrived at the hotel feeling confident but slightly nervous, her red hair styled in elegant waves that had required 3 hours in the salon to achieve. Her makeup had been applied with the kind of professional precision that came from decades of television appearances and photo shoots, but the overall effect was more understated than her usual stage appearance. She had studied photographs from previous galas, noting the styling choices of other performers and trying to understand the unwritten dress code that governed such events. The initial reception had been held in the Palm Court, where cocktails were being served among towering palm trees and elaborate floral arrangements that had cost more than many people's monthly salaries. The space was filled with the kind of people whose faces graced magazine covers and whose names appeared in entertainment industry trade publications on a daily basis. Conversations focused on box office numbers, streaming statistics, award season campaigns, and the kind of insider gossip that formed the currency of entertainment industry social interactions. Reba found herself standing with her manager, Narvel Blackstock, and her publicist, trying to navigate the complex social dynamics of an industry that operated according to unwritten rules she had never fully mastered. The conversations around her were conducted in a kind of code, with references to deals, projects, and relationships that assumed a level of insider knowledge that she sometimes lacked. People would mention someone by their first name only, assuming that everyone would know they were referring to a particular director, producer, or executive, creating a linguistic barrier that emphasized her outsider status. The initial reception from other guests had been polite but noticeably cool, with industry executives offering perfunctory greetings and quickly moving on to more important conversations. She noticed people glancing at her and then whispering to their companions, clearly discussing her presence at an event where country performers were unusual. The looks were not hostile exactly, but they carried a quality of curiosity mixed with condescension that made it clear she was being viewed as something of a novelty. As the evening progressed and guests moved from cocktails to dinner in the main ballroom, Reba began to sense an undercurrent of skepticism about what a country singer was doing at such a sophisticated event. She overheard fragments of conversations that questioned whether she would be able to connect with an audience that was more accustomed to pop and rock performances. The assumption seemed to be that country music was somehow less sophisticated, less worthy of respect, than other genres represented at the gala. One particularly jarring conversation occurred when she was introduced to a group of music industry executives, including the president of a major record label and several high-ranking promotion executives. After the initial pleasantries, one of them asked whether she thought country music would ever be able to achieve the kind of artistic sophistication that characterized other genres. The question was phrased politely, but the underlying assumption was clear. Country music was inherently limited in its artistic possibilities. The seating arrangement at dinner further emphasized her outsider status in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. While the biggest names in pop and rock music were seated at tables near the stage, where they could easily see and be seen, Reba found herself at a table toward the back of the ballroom, surrounded by mid-level industry executives and their spouses. The placement felt deliberate, a subtle but clear signal about where she ranked in the hierarchy of the evening's entertainment. Her table companions were polite but clearly more interested in networking with each other than in engaging with someone from what they obviously considered a less important genre of music. The conversations revealed a world of private schools and exclusive clubs, vacation homes and exclusive resort destinations, and social connections that existed far removed from the experiences that had shaped Reba's own life and career. When they asked about her background, their questions revealed assumptions about country music and its audience that ranged from condescending to openly dismissive. The dinner itself was an elaborate affair, with multiple courses prepared by celebrity chefs and wine pairings selected by sommelier consultants who specialized in events of this caliber. Each course was presented with the kind of theatrical flourish that characterized high-end catering, with servers who moved with choreographed precision and explanations of ingredients that sounded more like poetry than menu descriptions. The cost of the dinner alone probably exceeded what many families spent on food in an entire month. During the meal, Reba found herself engaged in increasingly uncomfortable conversations that revealed the depth of cultural prejudice she was facing. One particularly memorable exchange occurred when a music industry executive's wife asked if she found it difficult to connect with audiences outside of the rural South, as if her appeal was somehow geographically limited. The question was delivered with the kind of casual condescension that suggested the woman had never questioned her own assumptions about country music and its audience. Another guest, a prominent music critic who wrote for a major entertainment magazine, wondered aloud whether country music fans would even understand the sophisticated charitable work being supported by the evening's fundraiser. His comments suggested that he viewed country music audiences as somehow less intelligent or culturally aware than fans of other genres, an assumption that revealed more about his own prejudices than about the reality of country music's diverse and engaged fan base. The conversations became increasingly pointed as the wine flowed more freely and people felt more comfortable expressing their true opinions. Reba heard her music described as simplistic, her audience characterized as unsophisticated, and her presence at the gala portrayed as a novelty act designed to add some folksy charm to an otherwise serious cultural event. The comments were not necessarily intended to be cruel, but they revealed a level of cultural ignorance that was both embarrassing and infuriating. As the evening progressed through its various scheduled components, including speeches from Foundation board members and video presentations about the charity's work, Reba became increasingly aware of how different this world was from the one she knew. The speakers talked about music education in abstract terms, discussing statistics and funding models and administrative structures, but they seemed disconnected from the actual experience of learning and making music. Their presentations were polished and professional, but they lacked the emotional connection to music that had always driven Reba's own involvement in educational initiatives. The auction portion of the evening, where guests bid on exclusive experiences and luxury items to raise additional funds for the charity, provided further evidence of the economic divide that separated this crowd from the communities they were supposedly helping. Items that sold for tens of thousands of dollars included private concerts by major artists, exclusive dining experiences at world-renowned restaurants, and vacation packages to destinations that most people could never afford to visit. The bidding was spirited and competitive, but it felt more like a display of wealth than a genuine commitment to the charitable cause. The lowest point of the evening came when Reba was introduced as part of the entertainment lineup. The Master of Ceremonies, a well-known late-night television host whose show commanded millions of viewers and significant cultural influence, made a series of jokes about country music that were clearly intended to be good-natured, but came across as dismissive and condescending. His routine included references to pickup trucks, beer cans, and trailer parks that played into the most stereotypical and reductive images of country music culture. He suggested that the audience might need to remove their designer shoes and put on cowboy boots to properly appreciate her performance, a comment that drew laughter, but also revealed his assumption that country music was somehow incompatible with sophistication. He made jokes about teaching the Beverly Hills audience to line dance and suggested that someone should distribute beer cans to help them get into the proper mood for country music. Each joke was delivered with a smile and received with laughter, but the underlying message was clear. Country music was being treated as a curiosity rather than a legitimate art form. The audience's laughter at these jokes felt like a collective dismissal of everything Reba represented. She could see people at the front tables exchanging knowing glances and smirks, as if they were all in on a joke at her expense. The laughter was not the warm, appreciative sound of an audience enjoying clever humor, but the superior chuckling of people who felt they were witnessing something beneath their usual standards of sophistication. It was the kind of laughter that created insiders and outsiders, that reinforced social hierarchies and cultural prejudices. Sitting at her back table, listening to the laughter wash over the ballroom like a wave of rejection, Reba felt a familiar burning sensation in her chest that she recognized from other moments in her career when she had been underestimated or dismissed. It was the same feeling she had experienced as a young singer trying to make it in Nashville, when record executives told her that her voice was too country for mainstream success, too rooted in regional traditions to achieve broad commercial appeal. It was the same emotion she had felt when critics dismissed her acting ambitions as a vanity project by a singer who should stick to what she knew, when they suggested that country performers lacked the sophistication and training necessary for legitimate theatrical work. It was the same frustration she had experienced when music industry professionals treated her business acumen and artistic vision as somehow less valid than those of performers from other genres. But along with the hurt and anger that came from being diminished and stereotyped, Reba felt something else rising within her. A determination to prove these people wrong, to show them that their assumptions about country music and its artists were not just incorrect, but embarrassingly narrow-minded and culturally ignorant. She had not built a 3-decade career by backing down from challenges or accepting other people's limitations on what she could achieve. The laughter that was meant to diminish her instead ignited something fierce and unstoppable in her spirit. The moment of decision came when she excused herself from her table and walked to the ladies' restroom, ostensibly to check her makeup before her performance, but actually to have a few minutes alone to collect her thoughts and prepare for what she knew would be one of the most important performances of her career. The restroom was as luxurious as everything else in the hotel, with marble surfaces, gold fixtures, and fresh flowers that were replaced twice daily. Standing in front of that ornate mirror, surrounded by the opulent trappings of wealth and status, she could hear the muffled sounds of the gala continuing in the ballroom. More laughter, more self-congratulatory speeches, more evidence of an industry that thought it knew everything about music and entertainment, but had revealed its own limitations through its treatment of her and her genre. But Reba knew something that these industry insiders did not understand. That country music at its best was not the simple, unsophisticated genre they imagined it to be, but a rich and complex art form that dealt with the deepest emotions and most universal human experiences with an honesty and directness that other genres often avoided. She knew that her voice carried within it the stories of millions of people who worked hard, loved deeply, and faced their struggles with dignity and grace. She knew that the songs she had spent her career perfecting were not just entertainment, but healing, not just music, but medicine for hearts that had been broken and spirits that had been tested by life's inevitable challenges. Country music's greatest strength was not its simplicity, but its authenticity, its willingness to address difficult truths and complex emotions without hiding behind artifice or pretension. The repertoire she had planned for the evening was carefully chosen to demonstrate the sophistication and emotional range that characterized country music at its finest. She had selected songs that showcased not just her vocal abilities, but the genre's capacity for addressing universal themes of love, loss, resilience, and hope. The arrangements had been specifically crafted for the acoustics and atmosphere of the ballroom, designed to create an intimate connection with the audience despite the formal setting. As she prepared to return to the ballroom, Reba made a decision that would transform not just her own evening, but the way everyone in that room understood the power and sophistication of country music. She would not simply perform the songs she had planned, delivering a polite and professional set that would meet their low expectations without challenging their preconceptions. Instead, she would give them something they had never experienced before, a glimpse of what country music could be when it was performed with complete authenticity and absolute mastery. The walk back to her table felt different now, charged with purpose and determination that seemed to alter the very air around her. She could see the room more clearly, understanding that the condescension and dismissiveness she had encountered were not really about her personally, but about a broader cultural prejudice that dismissed entire communities and art forms as somehow less worthy of respect and serious consideration. The people in this room had never experienced the kind of honesty and emotional directness that characterized the best country music, and they were about to get an education they would never forget. They had made assumptions based on stereotypes and superficial impressions, but they were about to discover that their knowledge of country music was as limited as their understanding of the communities and cultures that had created it. When her name was called for her performance, Reba walked to the stage with the kind of confidence that comes from absolute clarity of purpose and complete mastery of one's craft. The ballroom fell into the kind of polite, expectant silence that greets all performers at such events. But underneath the surface politeness, she could sense the audience's skepticism and condescension. They were prepared to be politely tolerant of what they assumed would be a pleasant but unremarkable interlude before the evening's more serious entertainment. The stage setup was elegant and understated, with professional lighting that had been designed to complement the ballroom's architecture while creating the proper atmosphere for musical performance. The sound system was state-of-the-art, capable of reproducing every nuance of vocal and instrumental performance with crystal clarity. The piano that had been provided for her performance was a magnificent Steinway concert grand, the kind of instrument that was typically reserved for classical performances and serious musical presentations. As Reba approached the piano bench and adjusted the microphone to accommodate her height and vocal style, she could feel the weight of the audience's assumptions about what kind of performance they were about to witness. The conversations at the tables had not completely stopped, and she could sense that many of the guests were only giving her their partial attention, continuing to network and socialize while expecting her performance to provide pleasant background music for their continued interactions. The lighting dimmed slightly as she settled herself at the piano, her elegant black gown arranged carefully around the bench to avoid any wardrobe malfunctions or awkward moments that might distract from the music. Her hands found their familiar positions on the keyboard, muscle memory from decades of piano lessons and practice sessions taking over as she prepared to begin. But then Reba began to sing, and everything in the ballroom changed completely and irrevocably. The song she chose was not one of her biggest commercial hits like Fancy or Is There Life Out There, but a deeply personal ballad that she had written herself about loss, resilience, and the kind of quiet strength that allows people to endure unimaginable hardships and still find reasons to hope for better days ahead. The lyrics spoke to universal experiences of disappointment and recovery, of finding light in the darkest moments of human existence. Her voice, when it emerged from the sophisticated sound system, was unlike anything the audience had expected or prepared themselves to hear. It was not the stereotypical country twang they had anticipated, but a rich, sophisticated instrument that could convey both power and vulnerability with equal skill and artistic precision. The opening notes silenced the room completely, stopping conversations mid-sentence and drawing every person's attention to the woman at the piano, whose voice was filling the space with something that felt almost sacred. The song built slowly and deliberately, allowing Reba's voice to explore every emotional nuance of the lyrics, while demonstrating a level of technical artistry that few performers in any genre could match. Her breath control was flawless, her phrasing was sophisticated and emotionally intelligent, and her ability to convey complex emotions through subtle vocal inflections revealed years of study and practice that went far beyond anything the audience had expected. As the performance continued, the atmosphere in the ballroom underwent a complete and dramatic transformation. The sophisticated, cynical audience that had been prepared to politely tolerate a country music novelty act found themselves confronted with something they had not expected, and were not prepared to dismiss. Genuine artistry of the highest caliber, performed with a level of emotional honesty and technical skill that commanded respect from even the most skeptical listeners. Reba's voice soared and whispered, commanded attention and offered vulnerability, taking the audience on an emotional journey that left many of them visibly moved and struggling to maintain their composure. The song spoke to universal themes of love and loss, hope and despair, triumph and defeat, but it did so with a specificity and authenticity that could only come from someone who had lived through these experiences herself and found ways to transform that pain into something beautiful and healing. The performance demonstrated not just Reba's individual talent, but the sophisticated artistic traditions of country music itself. Her vocal techniques drew from gospel, blues, and folk traditions that predated the commercial music industry, while her emotional approach reflected the genre's commitment to authentic storytelling and honest emotional expression. She was not just singing a song, but channeling decades of musical tradition and cultural wisdom. Halfway through the performance, something remarkable and unprecedented happened in the ballroom. The cultural barriers that had seemed so insurmountable earlier in the evening began to dissolve as the audience recognized that they were witnessing something extraordinary that transcended their preconceptions and prejudices. The barriers between genres, between social classes, between different cultural traditions, seemed to melt away in the face of exceptional artistry presented with complete authenticity. The industry executives who had questioned her place at the gala found themselves completely captivated by her performance, recognizing in her voice and stage presence the kind of star quality that could not be manufactured or imitated. The socialites who had made condescending comments about country music were wiping tears from their eyes as Reba's voice reached into their hearts and touched emotions they had forgotten they possessed. The performers who had assumed their own artistic superiority were recognizing in Reba's voice a level of skill and emotional honesty that they could only aspire to achieve in their own work. Musicians who had spent their careers perfecting their craft were hearing techniques and approaches that challenged their assumptions about what was possible in vocal performance. As the song reached its emotional and musical climax, Reba's voice demonstrated a range and power that silenced any remaining doubts about her artistic capabilities or the sophistication of country music as an art form. She hit notes that would have challenged any opera singer, sustained phrases that required the kind of breath control that comes from decades of professional training, and conveyed emotions with such authenticity that the entire ballroom seemed to be holding its collective breath. The final notes of the song hung in the air for what felt like an eternity, followed by a silence so complete and profound that it seemed as if the entire room was afraid to breathe or move. The silence was not empty but full, charged with the recognition that everyone present had just witnessed something exceptional that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Then, slowly at first but building to a thunderous crescendo that seemed to shake the crystal chandeliers, the applause began. It was not the polite, obligatory applause that typically greets charity gala performances, but the kind of sustained, enthusiastic ovation that is reserved for truly transcendent artistic moments that connect with audiences on the deepest possible level. People throughout the ballroom rose to their feet as if pulled by invisible strings, many of them with tears streaming down their faces, applauding not just for the performance they had just witnessed, but for their own recognition of how completely wrong they had been about country music and its greatest practitioners. The standing ovation continued for several minutes, with calls for an encore and expressions of amazement that filled the air like a collective confession of previous ignorance and prejudice. The transformation in the room was so complete that it felt like a different event entirely, as if the earlier part of the evening had been erased and replaced with something entirely new. The same people who had been making condescending jokes about country music just an hour earlier were now approaching Reba with expressions of genuine admiration and respect, eager to apologize for their previous assumptions and to express their newfound appreciation for her artistry. Industry executives who had dismissed her genre as commercially limited were suddenly interested in discussing potential collaborations and crossover opportunities that could bring country music's authentic emotional power to broader audiences. Record label presidents who had never seriously considered country music were approaching her manager to discuss recording projects and distribution deals. The evening's host, who had made the unfortunate jokes during Reba's introduction, approached her immediately after the performance with a heartfelt apology and a request for her to return to his television show as a musical guest. His embarrassment was evident as he acknowledged that his humor had been based on ignorance and stereotype. rather than actual knowledge of country music's artistic achievements. Other performers on the evening's lineup, including several Grammy-winning artists who were scheduled to perform later in the program, expressed their honor at sharing the stage with her and asked for advice about incorporating some of her emotional directness and authenticity into their own work. Musicians who had built their careers on technical precision and commercial appeal were recognizing the power of the emotional honesty that characterized Reba's performance. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from the young musicians who were beneficiaries of the charity being supported that evening. A group of teenagers from various inner-city music programs had been invited to attend the gala as guests, giving them exposure to professional performance and industry networking that would be invaluable for their own artistic development. These young artists surrounded Reba after her performance with questions about her career, her songwriting process, her vocal techniques, and her advice for young performers trying to find their own voices in an industry that often seemed to value marketing and image over authentic artistic expression. Their enthusiasm and genuine curiosity reminded her of her own early experiences as a young performer trying to learn from established artists. One young woman, a 17-year-old singer from East Los Angeles named Maria, told Reba that her performance had completely changed her understanding of what was possible in music and performance. Maria had been struggling to find her own artistic identity, torn between the commercial expectations of the industry and her desire to create something authentic and meaningful that reflected her own cultural background and personal experiences. Reba's performance had shown her that it was possible to be both commercially successful and artistically honest, to reach large audiences without compromising the emotional truth that made music powerful and transformative. The demonstration of technical excellence combined with authentic emotional expression provided a model for how young artists could develop their own careers without sacrificing their artistic integrity. The conversation with these young musicians reminded Reba of why she had accepted the invitation to perform at the gala in the first place. It was not about gaining acceptance from industry insiders or proving herself to skeptical audiences, but about supporting the next generation of artists and ensuring that they would have the same opportunities for musical education and artistic development that had shaped her own career. As the evening wound down and guests began to make their departures, Reba found herself surrounded by people who wanted to express their appreciation for what they had experienced and to acknowledge how completely their perceptions had been changed. Many of them admitted that they had never really listened to country music before, acknowledging that their preconceptions had prevented them from appreciating an entire art form and the communities that had created it. Others spoke about how her performance had reminded them of music's power to transcend cultural boundaries and speak to universal human experiences that connected people across all differences of background, education, and social status. Several guests mentioned that they were planning to explore country music more seriously, recognizing that they had been missing something significant in their understanding of American musical culture. The media representatives who had attended the gala were equally transformed by what they had witnessed. Entertainment reporters who had come expecting to write routine coverage of another charity event found themselves crafting reviews that acknowledged their own previous ignorance while attempting to convey the power of what they had experienced to readers who had not been present. The drive back to her hotel that night was a quiet one, filled with reflection on what had transpired over the course of the evening and consideration of what it might mean for her career and for country music more broadly. Reba's manager and publicist, who had watched the transformation of the audience with amazement, spoke about the impact her performance would have on industry perceptions and the opportunities it would likely create for both her personally and for other country artists. But for Reba, the most important outcome was not professional but personal. The recognition that her art could bridge any cultural divide and speak to any audience when it was presented with complete authenticity and confidence in its own worth. She had learned that the best response to prejudice and condescension was not argument or defensive explanation, but simply demonstrating excellence so undeniable that all criticism was rendered irrelevant and embarrassing. The media coverage of the gala in the following days and weeks focused heavily on Reba's performance, with entertainment reporters and music critics acknowledging that they had witnessed something extraordinary that challenged their previous assumptions about country music's artistic possibilities. Reviews described her set as a masterclass in vocal performance and emotional communication, with many writers admitting that they had underestimated both Reba personally and country music as a genre. Major newspapers and entertainment magazines that had rarely covered country music seriously began featuring in-depth articles about the genre's artistic traditions and contemporary developments. Music critics who had dismissed country music as commercially driven and artistically limited were forced to reconsider their positions in light of what they had witnessed at the gala. The ripple effects of that evening extended far beyond the immediate coverage and industry response. Reba found herself inundated with offers from prestigious venues and high-profile events that had never previously considered booking country artists. Symphony orchestras reached out about collaboration opportunities that would combine classical musicians with country vocals and songwriting. Broadway producers inquired about her interest in returning to musical theater, recognizing that her vocal abilities and stage presence could bring new audiences to theatrical productions. Television networks requested meetings about potential variety show projects that could showcase country music's diversity and sophistication to mainstream audiences who had never been exposed to its full range. But perhaps most importantly, the performance opened doors for other country artists who had been similarly marginalized by industry prejudices and cultural assumptions. Promoters and booking agents who had witnessed Reba's triumph began to reconsider their assumptions about country music's commercial and artistic potential in markets outside of its traditional geographic base. The success of her performance became a catalyst for broader recognition of country music's sophistication and universal appeal, leading to increased opportunities for country artists to perform in prestigious venues and for diverse audiences. Record labels began to invest more seriously in country music projects, recognizing the genre's potential for reaching audiences that had been overlooked or underestimated. Years later, when music industry professionals discussed watershed moments in the evolution of country music's cultural status and broader acceptance, that October evening at the Beverly Hills Hotel would be cited as a crucial turning point. Reba's performance had not just been a personal triumph, but a collective awakening to the artistic possibilities that existed when cultural prejudices were set aside and music was allowed to speak for itself. The young musicians who had been inspired by her performance that night went on to create their own groundbreaking work, often citing Reba's example as proof that authenticity and commercial success were not mutually exclusive. Many of them would later credit that evening with changing their understanding of what was possible in their own careers, showing them that the most powerful performances came not from trying to meet others' expectations, but from exceeding them through complete commitment to artistic honesty and excellence. For Reba herself, the evening became a defining moment that reinforced her commitment to pushing boundaries and challenging assumptions throughout the rest of her career. She had learned that excellence was the most powerful form of advocacy, that the best way to change minds was not through argument, but through demonstration of undeniable artistic achievement. The laughter that had initially stung and motivated her anger became the catalyst for one of the most important performances of her career, proving that mockery and condescension could be transformed into motivation for transcendent artistic achievement. The evening had begun with Reba feeling like an outsider in a world that did not understand or appreciate her art. But it ended with that same world recognizing that they had been the outsiders, looking in at an art form they had never taken the time to truly understand or appreciate. Through the power of her voice and the authenticity of her performance, Reba had not just stolen the show, she had transformed everyone who witnessed it, creating a moment of recognition and understanding that would resonate far beyond that single evening in Beverly Hills and influence the trajectory of country music's cultural acceptance for years to come. The immediate aftermath of her performance was unlike anything Reba had experienced in her 3 decades of professional entertainment. As she stepped away from the piano, the thunderous applause continuing to wash over the ballroom like waves against a shore, she found herself surrounded by industry figures who had been dismissive just hours earlier, but were now eager to express their amazement and newfound respect. The transformation was so complete and so rapid that it felt almost surreal, as if she had stepped through a portal into a different version of the same evening. Marcus Goldstein, the president of Atlantic Records, who had earlier questioned whether country music could achieve artistic sophistication, was among the first to approach her. His face showed genuine embarrassment as he extended his hand and offered an apology that was both heartfelt and revealing. He admitted that his knowledge of country music had been limited to commercial radio hits, and that he had never been exposed to the genre's deeper artistic traditions. Her performance had opened his eyes to possibilities he had never considered, and he was already thinking about how his label might explore country music collaborations that could bring that level of authenticity to mainstream audiences. The conversation with Goldstein led to an impromptu gathering of other record executives, each eager to share their own revelations about what they had just witnessed. These were people who controlled hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue, who made decisions that shaped the direction of popular culture, yet they were admitting that their understanding of an entire musical genre had been woefully inadequate. Their willingness to acknowledge their ignorance was both refreshing and significant, suggesting that the evening's impact would extend far beyond personal embarrassment to actual changes in industry practices. Patricia Williams, the entertainment journalist who had earlier suggested that country music fans might not understand sophisticated charity work, approached Reba with tears still visible in her eyes. Her apology was more personal than professional, acknowledging that her comments had revealed her own cultural prejudices rather than any factual understanding of country music's audience. She spoke about growing up in New York City with very limited exposure to country music, relying on stereotypes and assumptions rather than actual knowledge. Reba's performance had forced her to confront the limitations of her own cultural perspective. The conversation with Williams opened up a broader discussion about media representation and cultural understanding that drew in several other journalists and critics who had been present that evening. They began to examine how their own reporting had perpetuated stereotypes and limited understanding, acknowledging that they had a responsibility to explore and represent American musical culture more accurately and respectfully. Several of them committed to traveling to Nashville and other country music centers to gain first-hand experience of the genre's diversity and sophistication. As word of the extraordinary performance spread beyond the ballroom to other areas of the hotel, additional industry figures began arriving to witness what everyone was describing as a transformative moment in entertainment history. Producers, directors, talent agents, and music supervisors who had not been part of the original guest list were calling colleagues and rushing to the hotel to understand what had created such unprecedented excitement among some of the most jaded professionals in the entertainment business. The young musicians who had been beneficiaries of the Foundation's programs found themselves at the center of conversations with industry professionals who were suddenly interested in understanding how musical education could nurture the kind of authentic artistry they had just witnessed. These teenagers, who had arrived as guests enjoying a rare glimpse into the entertainment industry's elite gatherings, were now being treated as valuable sources of insight about musical development and artistic authenticity. Maria, the 17-year-old singer from East Los Angeles, found herself in conversation with Grammy-winning producers who were asking about her own musical background and influences. They wanted to understand how young artists developed the kind of emotional honesty and technical skill that had characterized Reba's performance. Maria spoke eloquently about the importance of staying connected to her cultural roots while developing her technical abilities, a perspective that resonated with industry professionals who were beginning to understand that authenticity could not be manufactured or imitated. The Foundation's board members, who had initially been concerned about including a country performer in their sophisticated fundraising event, were now congratulating themselves on what they were calling the most successful gala in the organization's 35-year history. The evening had not only exceeded their fundraising goals, but had created the kind of memorable experience that would generate ongoing support and engagement from donors who had been moved by what they witnessed. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the Foundation's executive director, spoke with Reba about the possibility of developing ongoing programs that would bring country music's educational traditions to urban communities that had been underserved by traditional music education programs. The conversation revealed common ground between country music's community-based learning traditions and the Foundation's goals of providing musical opportunities to young people who might not otherwise have access to professional instruction. As the formal program of the evening concluded and guests began to move to the hotel's various lounges and bars for continued networking and conversation, Reba found herself at the center of discussions that ranged from immediate business opportunities to broader questions about cultural understanding and artistic authenticity. The conversations were more substantive and intellectually engaging than the typical entertainment industry small talk, as if her performance had elevated the level of discourse throughout the gathering. The Beverly Hills Hotel's Polo Lounge, legendary for hosting deal-making conversations that had shaped entertainment history, became the site of discussions about potential collaborations that could bridge the gap between country music and mainstream entertainment. Television producers talked about variety show concepts that could showcase country music's diversity to broader audiences. Film producers discussed soundtrack opportunities that could feature country artists in more sophisticated contexts than the typical rural or working-class settings where the genre was usually placed. Reba's manager, Narvel Blackstock, found himself fielding inquiries about her availability for projects that would have been unimaginable just hours earlier. Symphony orchestras were interested in classical country fusion concerts. Broadway producers wanted to discuss musical theater projects that could take advantage of her vocal range and dramatic abilities. Television networks were proposing variety shows and dramatic series that could feature her as both performer and actress. The offers were not just numerous but qualitatively different from the typical opportunities available to country artists. These were not attempts to make her more mainstream by abandoning her country roots, but invitations to bring country music's authentic traditions to new contexts and audiences. The industry professionals who had dismissed country music as commercially limited were now recognizing its potential to reach audiences that had been overlooked by more conventional pop and rock approaches. Among the most intriguing conversations was one with Dr. Robert Chen, a musicologist from UCLA who had been studying American musical traditions for over 20 years. Chen approached Reba with excitement about the possibility of documenting and preserving the vocal techniques and storytelling traditions that had been displayed in her performance. He spoke about country music as a repository of American cultural knowledge that had been undervalued by academic institutions and cultural organizations. Chen's perspective provided an intellectual framework for understanding what had happened that evening, explaining how Reba's performance had demonstrated the sophisticated artistic traditions that existed within country music but were rarely recognized by mainstream cultural institutions. Their conversation touched on the importance of oral tradition in American music, the role of storytelling in preserving cultural memory, and the ways that authentic artistic expression could transcend social and economic boundaries. The academic validation represented by Chen's interest was particularly meaningful to Reba, who had always understood that country music carried intellectual and cultural weight that was rarely acknowledged by educational institutions. The possibility of university collaborations and academic recognition opened up new avenues for legitimizing country music's artistic contributions while maintaining its authentic character. As the evening extended well past its scheduled conclusion, with guests reluctant to leave what many were describing as a historic moment in entertainment history, Reba found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. The path from her childhood in rural Oklahoma to this moment of triumph in Beverly Hills had been marked by constant challenges to prove herself and her genre's worthiness of serious consideration. She thought about her early days in Nashville, when she had been told repeatedly that her voice was too country, too rooted in regional traditions to achieve broad commercial success. Record executives had encouraged her to modify her sound, to adopt more pop-oriented approaches that would make her more palatable to mainstream audiences. The pressure to compromise her artistic authenticity had been constant and sometimes overwhelming. Her success had come not from abandoning those authentic traditions, but from perfecting them, from demonstrating that country music's emotional directness and storytelling sophistication could connect with audiences across all demographic and geographic boundaries. Tonight's performance had been the culmination of that philosophy, proving that authenticity was not a limitation, but a strength that could transcend any artificial barrier. The conversations continued until nearly 3 o'clock in the morning, with industry professionals, journalists, and fellow artists reluctant to end an evening that many were calling transformative. The Beverly Hills hotel staff, accustomed to hosting events that extended beyond their scheduled conclusions, provided additional service and refreshments to accommodate the ongoing discussions. The networking that typically characterized such gatherings had evolved into something more substantive and meaningful. People were not just exchanging business cards and scheduling meetings, but engaging in genuine conversations about artistic authenticity, cultural understanding, and the responsibility of the entertainment industry to represent American musical traditions accurately and respectfully. Several concrete collaborations emerged from these late-night conversations. A documentary filmmaker committed to creating a comprehensive exploration of country music's artistic traditions, with Reba serving as both subject and consultant. A symphony orchestra scheduled a series of concerts featuring country artists in classical settings. A major television network began developing a program that would showcase the diversity and sophistication of American roots music. Most significantly, several major record labels announced their intention to create new country music divisions that would focus on artistic development rather than commercial formatting. These initiatives represented a fundamental shift in industry attitudes, acknowledging that country music's authentic traditions could be commercially successful without being diluted or compromised. The media coverage that began appearing the next morning reflected the unprecedented nature of what had occurred. Entertainment reporters who had attended the gala struggled to convey the transformation they had witnessed, with many acknowledging that their previous coverage of country music had been inadequate and stereotypical. Major newspapers that rarely covered country music seriously featured front-page articles about the evening's impact. The Los Angeles Times ran a comprehensive piece titled, "The Night Country Music Changed Everything," which included interviews with industry executives who admitted their previous misconceptions about the genre. The New York Times featured an editorial about cultural prejudice in the entertainment industry, using the evening's events as a case study in how assumptions and stereotypes could limit artistic appreciation and commercial opportunity. Rolling Stone magazine, which had historically given limited coverage to country music, committed to a special issue exploring the genre's artistic traditions and contemporary developments. The magazine's editor-in-chief acknowledged that their coverage had been influenced by cultural biases that had prevented them from recognizing country music's sophistication and diversity. Television coverage was equally extensive, with major networks featuring segments about the evening's impact on industry perceptions and cultural understanding. The morning talk shows invited Reba to discuss not just her performance, but the broader implications of what had occurred. These interviews provided opportunities to educate mainstream audiences about country music's authentic traditions and artistic achievements. The international media attention was particularly significant, as European and Asian entertainment outlets picked up the story and began exploring American country music as a serious artistic tradition worthy of international recognition. This global attention opened up new markets and opportunities for country artists who had previously been limited to primarily American audiences. Music industry trade publications provided detailed analysis of the evening's commercial implications, projecting increased investment in country music projects and expanded opportunities for country artists in mainstream entertainment contexts. The coverage acknowledged that the evening had created a new paradigm for understanding country music's commercial and artistic potential. The impact on Reba's own career was immediate and profound. Within a week of the gala, her management team was fielding offers for projects that represented entirely new categories of opportunity. Major symphony orchestras were requesting classical country collaborations. Broadway producers were proposing musical theater projects specifically designed to showcase her vocal abilities and dramatic skills. Television networks were developing variety show concepts that would feature her as host while showcasing country music's diversity to mainstream audiences. Film producers were discussing dramatic roles that could take advantage of her acting experience while introducing her to movie audiences who might not be familiar with her musical career. The recording opportunities were equally exciting, with major labels proposing projects that would document and preserve country music's authentic traditions while making them accessible to broader audiences. These were not attempts to make her more mainstream by abandoning her country roots, but invitations to bring country music's sophisticated traditions to new contexts and audiences. Perhaps most importantly, the success of her performance opened doors for other country artists who had been similarly marginalized by industry prejudices. Booking agents and promoters who had witnessed her triumph began actively seeking opportunities to present country music in prestigious venues and sophisticated contexts. Young country artists found themselves with opportunities that had not existed before, as industry professionals began to understand that authenticity and artistic sophistication were not mutually exclusive. Music education programs began incorporating country music traditions into their curricula, recognizing the genre's valuable contributions to American musical culture. The ripple effects extended into academic institutions, where musicology departments began developing serious scholarly programs focused on country music's artistic traditions and cultural significance. Universities that had previously ignored or marginalized country music began offering courses and degree programs that treated the genre with the same respect accorded to other American musical traditions. The evening had demonstrated that excellence was indeed the most powerful form of advocacy, that the best way to change minds and challenge prejudices was through undeniable artistic achievement rather than argument or explanation. Reba's performance had not just entertained an audience, but educated them, transforming their understanding of an entire genre and the communities that had created it. Years later, when music historians and industry professionals discussed watershed moments in the evolution of American popular music, that October evening at the Beverly Hills Hotel would be recognized as a crucial turning point. It marked the moment when country music gained serious recognition as a sophisticated art form capable of speaking to universal human experiences with unprecedented emotional honesty and technical excellence. The young musicians who had been inspired by Reba's performance that night went on to build careers that were shaped by her example of artistic authenticity and excellence. Many of them would later credit the evening with showing them that the most powerful art came from embracing rather than disguising their authentic cultural backgrounds and personal experiences. For Reba herself, the evening became a defining moment that validated her lifelong commitment to artistic authenticity and cultural pride. She had proven that excellence could overcome any prejudice, that authentic artistic expression could transcend any social or cultural boundary. The laughter and condescension that had initially motivated her anger had been transformed into the catalyst for one of the most important performances of her career. The Beverly Hills Hotel Gala had begun as just another charity fundraiser, but it became something far more significant, a moment of cultural recognition and understanding that would influence the trajectory of American music for generations to come. Through the power of her voice and the authenticity of her performance, Reba had not just stolen the show but transformed an entire industry's understanding of what American music could be.